In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to use checkboxes. Here I have a Graphite Studio project that I created named Video Guide Checkbox Demo. And it's a brand new project. We're going to go ahead and create a category. I'll name the category Models. In the models, I'm going to create a few artifacts. The first artifact is going to be an enumeration named Skill. I'll tab out and then click OK. In Skill, I'm going to enter a couple skills: PHP, Python, CSS, JavaScript. I'm going to save this enumeration, close it. I'm going to create an entity this time. For this entity, I'm going to inherit it from an existing entity called Person. And then I'm going to call this entity Candidate. Tab out, click OK. Now I've created an entity, and since I inherited it from Person, it got all of its properties from Person. I'm going to add one more property here. I'm going to call this Skills, and since it's plural, obviously, it's going to be a list. And I choose Skill as my type. Skills is a list of skill. Very simple. I save it. Now, my models are complete. Next step is going to be creating a screen having a few fields in there. A save button to save some information to the database. I'm going to go ahead and create a category. I'll call it Screens, and in there I'm going to add a view. This view, I will call it Add Candidate. And I will give it a title which will be the same. I'll make it the default page. Save. In the content, I'm going to make this a very simple non-fancy page. I'm going to add a form. In the form, I'm going to add 3 field sets. One for the first name, one for last name, and one for the checkbox field. In the first field set, I'm going to add a text box. And in the next one, I'm going to add another text box to get the last name. And in the third one, I'm going to add a checkbox field. So, as you notice on the screen here, if I enlarge it, there's the first name, there's the last name, and for the checkbox, you only see a little border which will change once we enter the properties for each one of these fields. First, I'm going to name the form Candidate Form. I'm going to name the first field First Name Field, and I like to prefix the name of the name so I know what I'm dealing with within the flowchart. Focus index is 1, label is first name, second field is last name field. Set the label last name, and the final one, the checkbox, I'm going to call it Skills field. Focus index 3. However, in the choices dropdown, I'm going to choose Skill. In here, I'm going to choose a property inside Skill which happens to be the description and the label. I'm going to call it Skills or choose Skills, whatever you find appropriate. When you look at this screen, you have 3 fields here. However, I would like this to be a long field in case we have a lot of choices that we would like to put into that enumeration. In order to facilitate that, there are a couple ways to do it. What I'm going to do today is in the form, I'm going to say field sets per line is 2. What that does is, it makes the first name and last name come up in the first line, and then the second line, you see skills as a field. Now, I'm going to click on this field set, and I'm going to change its type to long, and you'll notice that skills took up the whole line. This follows pretty much the Twitter Bootstrap Flexbox grid system. Finally, I'm going to add a button panel. And in the button panel, I'm going to add a button. Now, I'm going to set the properties for the button. Save button. I'm going to set its focus index to 4. And its title to save. I'm also going to say that I'm going to submit this candidate form to that button when it's clicked. The next and final step in this screen is to click Add Behavior, which will handle the click for the Save button. Since I submitted the form to the Save button, all the fields have been created here. First name is text, last name is text, whereas Skills field, which is a checkbox, you could choose multiple options. So it created the Skills field as a type of skill, but as a list. So all of the choices that you choose are passed to this behavior in the form of this Skills field. What we're going to do here is add a create shape to create a new candidate. I'm going to choose new candidate. I'm going to create a new variable name called new candidate, and I'm going to set the properties here. First name field, last name. By the way, I just typed last and used control space, and it finishes it for me. And skills field. The next step is to save to the database. I use the save shape. I click add and new candidate here. What happens here is it not only saves the candidate record, but it also saves all the link records for all the skills. Later, I will show those in a database. I'm going to click OK. Finally, what I want to do is I'm going to use a page instruction to send a notification that we saved the data. Set notification. The transition, I'm going to make it slide right. Title, of course I can make the title into a string, but the right thing to do is a translation key. Save, and then another translation key for message, where we can say candidate has been saved. You will see how I set up the translations in a few minutes here. That's it. We're done with this flowchart. Let's add the end shape, and let's go ahead and set up the environment. In fact, before we do that, why don't we go ahead and take care of the translation. I go to the home screen by clicking on this link. I come back here, I go to Edit Languages, and all my keywords show up here, and the default language is US English. We're going to type add candidate in English, and candidate has been saved. First name, last name, skills, save it. For good measure, let's open up the page, recycle it, and make sure that we can see that these look fine. Let's go ahead and set up the environment settings. Set the name to deploy type local, SQL Server, authentication. Database name is Video Guide Checkbox Demo DB. Username SA. I'm entering my password. Database server is local. If you're using SQL Server Express or any other database, give the appropriate database server name. Localhost for the web server, and then for my website name, I'm going to type local.videoguide-checkboxdemo.com. I'm going to use default and public, click OK, and go do a build. I don't want to do a release build. I want to have my build go a little bit faster. So I'm going to go to Settings, and go to Debug and set this project in debug mode. And then we're going to go do a build. If I click on this link, I'll open up the app. It's warming up the app pools, so for the first time after every build, you'll see a little bit of a lag. We get an error saying that the database that we set up for the application to use is not in the SQL server. So if we go into SQL Management Studio, you don't see the database. Let's go to Graphite and then go to Settings. Create the database. Once this is complete in a few seconds here, let's confirm that the database has been created. And we'll go check our application. Database has been created. Refresh databases. And there's our database with all our tables. We'll come back to this screen to look at all the data. Let's go back in here. In fact, we can simply go to the browser and just recycle. You'll see the form here. So if I say Joe Smith, let's say Joe Smith is very good at CSS and JavaScript and does not know Python or PHP. Save, and once the record is saved, you'll see a notification that pops up here. Just to finish our video, let's look at the database. There's your candidate. If I look at all the rows in the candidate, I just see one. And I only see the ID here, and I don't see the first name and last name. Since we are using an entity framework to generate the database, it is going to generate it in an object-oriented format. And remember, we inherited candidate from person. So I open up person, that's where I'll see the properties of person. And this ID will be the match between both of those tables. If you look at candidate, the candidate also had skills. So there's a link table here which links a candidate with the skills. So if you have candidate ID 1, which is Joe Smith, and Joe Smith happens to have skills 3 and 4, if we look at the skills table, skills 3 and 4 happen to be CSS and JS, which is exactly what we chose. That concludes our demo for checkboxes.